Hello and welcome to the Fruit Market. I'm Fiona Bradley, the director, and I'm delighted to welcome you virtually to the space. It's a conversation I'm going to have with Neil Gillespie, the director of Reiach and Hall, about the building that we're sitting in, the building that together, I like to say, we built, although I think Neil probably had more of a hand in it than I did. This is the first time that we have live streamed a discussion in this way at the Fruit Market, and so we're on a journey, and we're really pleased that you're all on the journey with us. Neil and I are here in the space, and my colleague Ruth is monitoring the chat and the Q&A box. Neil and I are going to talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then there'll be a chance for questions, which Ruth will read out. I'm afraid we haven't quite worked out how you can ask questions live yet, but please do pop questions in the Q&A and Ruth will read them out when we get to that point. We'd also love it if you could introduce yourself in the chat and say where you're from. And if you could make sure that the chat is to everyone rather than just a panelist, then everyone can see where people are joining us from, and we'd love that. The first thing I want to say is that building making is a team sport. For the Fruit Market, as well as me, many colleagues have been involved, not at all limited to, but very much headed up by Jamie Mitchell, our gallery manager, and Armida Taylor, our head of operations. We wouldn't have got here without them and the rest of the team. And for Reiach and Hall, Neil, I think it's fair to say that the inimitable David Anderson, our project architect, has been a key member of your team.
Absolutely.
And of ours.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So whilst Neil and I are here talking as though we're the only people
Taking the glory.
Taking the glory, exactly, that's not really fair. However, having said that, all buildings start with an idea. And I suppose it was an idea that we had between us. Mm-hmm. And what I want to do is start this conversation by casting our joint minds back to that point when we started talking about what we could build together here, and try and ask you to cast your mind back and think, what did it look like then? What did the problem look like, the question look like? What was in your mind that made you think that you did want to do this project, or maybe you didn't? I don't know.
No. I mean, we were hugely aware of fruit markets, but I was going to say location, and I literally mean location in Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that more, I'm sure we will. But it was also its position in that kind of art world. Mm-hmm. and we, as a practice, we've done a few. Our portfolio is very select, I think. Mm-hmm. And they're projects that feed larger projects.
Buildings for art in particular, or buildings?
Yeah, buildings for art. I think so. I think there's a possibility of exploring ideas, mm-hmm. and those ideas can translate into different projects that might find it difficult to begin with those kind of ideas. So there are a number of thoughts that we've had on the city, how we build in the city, mm-hmm. that come from not only this building, but work that we did for the collective and Pure Art Centre, etc. So they're critical to our thinking.
Because certainly it was very important to us that you're a practice cited in the city. But I want Neil to pick up again. We're talking very beautifully about the Fruit Market's place as an institution in Edinburgh, and I'd like to ask you to, if you could, to talk a little bit about its physical location and, and the specifics of Edinburgh.
Yeah, they're critical to our thinking because, you know, obviously we've lived in Edinburgh for a long time, and so we've enjoyed this world of, or two worlds really, two cities, the old town and the new town, and they both represent very different places in a sense, and I think that's what makes Edinburgh so unique. Mm-hmm. And it has to do with topography as well. Built on a hill, built on a ridge, and in a sense, the Fruit Market's location is between those two worlds. It sits right on the edge of the old town and right at the beginning of the new town. So it's a really privileged position, I think. And so is the station. Coming into Edinburgh, right in the centre. That's really unique. And Fruit Market's absolutely there. And that duality is a theme that then starts to run through the project.
Of the old and the new town, the medieval and the Enlightenment, do you think?
Yeah, but also this idea of the abstract. So the planned city. So Craig's planned grid. Mm-hmm. and that more visceral old town, which is just something which occurs.
The guddle. Of the
It's made.
Yeah.
So it's about material, and it's about space, which is much more organic.
And how did that, because I know it did, how did that distill itself down into your approach to this building? Because it's quite an abstract concept, the idea of sitting between the old and the new, the abstract and the planned. How did that distill itself down?
Well, I think the original gallery spaces were white spaces. Mm-hmm. So we read those as, well, we read both buildings as found places.
It's just probably worth saying for people who don't know the buildings as well as we did, that the brief, the thing we brought to you, was the building that we had, the building that the Fruitmarket has occupied for 40 years, and the opportunity of expanding into the building next door. So we had our original building and the new building, which is actually the older building.
That's right. And both of them have had previous lives.
Yes.
Very different lives. So over many, many years, many generations, they've accrued different characters. Mm-hmm. Extension, movement, refurbishment, renewal.
And they've worn those accretions really physically in the fabric of the building.
And we can see them. Mm. And I think that's the critical thing. I suppose with the white space, which is the original gallery space, we were reading that as the abstract space. Mm-hmm. The one that almost relates to the new town, that sense of white space, lit, beautifully lit, daylit. So it was about a kind of ephemeral kind of place, which is why I kind of call it abstract, but maybe that's wrong, I'm not sure.
You call it in this leaflet, which I'm showing to everyone, that we have published about the Fruitmarket's development, and is available, I think, as a download through the chat as well, and you can pick it up in the Fruitmarket. But you talk about it as Apollonian space, as well as abstract. Do you want to unpack that a little bit for us? Yeah,
well, this is one of my themes. So, okay. Because I think it's related to all of us.
Hiding something, is it lying to us?
I don't think it's lying, but I think it's layered.
Right.
So that it's wearing skin, or it's projecting something to the world that says, I'm fine. But deep inside, in this building, we're weeping.
That's very nice. I like,
and I think that was what we really enjoyed about this. This space was discovering it. And that was the possibility that this particular building had a hard life again, and revealing the layers. And I suppose that's why it was a discovery for David and Armida and Jamie and yourself. We were all discovering it at the same time because it wasn't visible to begin with.
I suppose one of the things that I have really loved about the journey of this building is working with you is very much like working with an artist, in that there's a response to materials and there's an idea, and everything is made logical and understandable because of that idea. So as you say, when we discover things about this building, it's fine because the idea is that the guts of this building should be on display, and that it should win. And I think there's something that I have found, even putting one show into this building so far, is that the building asserts its character, and that it likes to win. And I love the way that you talk about the two kinds of building, sort of gives shape to that. It gives a clarity that, and when you're working, because your work is so specific, and you have to make something which will stand up. How do you manage to keep that sense of the idea and the defining principle alive?
David did that. No, I think it's recognizing that there could be an idea in the first place, and obviously we had a lot of there was a lot of work to do stabilizing everything. Floors, we're above the station.
Yes, so let's go into that a little bit, because I don't know the extent to which people know that the very specific particularities of the Fruitmarket buildings, and you know them. You and David now know them better than most. Take us through the challenges of the
effectively
building.
We're on a bridge, which is sitting above the platforms. And originally these were fruit markets, and the produce came in by train and came up.
We are in fact almost sitting underneath the hoist, that there would be a hole where we're sitting. There was a hole, we all saw it, and the hoist would have hoisted the fruit up.
Fruit up to here, then out onto the street, and you see these amazing photographs of Market Street lined with vans as they take the produce off to the shops and things. So it's actually, although it looks a very stable, it's actually a really dynamic building because it has this section, which when you draw the section, you suddenly realise you're up in the air.
Yeah, so the building doesn't touch the ground.
No.
The road doesn't touch the ground. And there is a moment, I believe, where the road and the building are very intimately connected.
Or disconnected, as we found.
Yes.
And that was where a lot of the challenges were, was recognising that ground was not quite what you thought, which led us into an idea. We were going to relook at the main stair from an accessibility point of view, and we needed to find an element, because you're dealing with these two very different worlds, this shadowed world and this daylit world. An element or two elements really that connect the two. And in a very early discussion that we had was how you circulate through this building.
Yeah.
And so the idea was to circulate in parallel with the pavement. So it's as if the pavement is inside the building and you get this really long dimension.
Which of course is crucial to us because we're a public building. Yeah. We're a free to enter public building. So the idea that you actually managed to make the building mirror the street and invite people. I mean, literally, I notice now, I'm sure those of you who've been to the building do as well, if you walk along the front inside the building, you fall into step with people on the pavement.
That's what we hope might happen. Yeah, that's brilliant. But materially, it affected us materially. So that instead of it being a lightweight material, it's concrete. So it represents the pavement, but it also represents ground. But underneath it, there is no ground. So there's a kind of, there's a dynamic there that keeps us smiling. But you needn't know that. And then the new stair, again, was made of concrete so that there was a sense of permanence, and the two have a chat to each other.
So in terms, I mean, I think you're very, very good at materials, and clearly there's a theoretical understanding as well as a material understanding of materials. So the concrete is the ground. It anchors this abstract Apollonian space. It puts your feet on the ground before your head's hit the clouds upstairs.
Yes,
very literally gives you somewhere to start.
In the gods.
Yes, and that is then mirrored in the element here in the ramp. Was there any? Don't you get the temptation sometimes to show off and have more materials than that? You've been very restrained there.
I think as a practice, that's what we like doing. I mean, I think I'll get this wrong, my quote wrong. I think it was Cuneo Mayer speaking about the Celt, and this was in the Kenneth White book, and he was referring to the Celt and saying that the Celt, like the Japanese, prefer the half-said thing. And you know that there's a lot of Japan in these spaces, Japanese influence. We immediately recognized that this was a kind of Minka house. I don't know if you know the Minka house, but these amazing structures that hold up these big roofs that are completely in shadow. The West always puts light on the top, whereas the Japanese build a big roof and bring the eaves right down so that the building's full of shadow. And in that shadow, and this is what's remarkable about this exhibition, beautiful essay by Taniguchi called In Praise of Shadows, that all the Japanese lacquerware and gold leaf was never meant to be seen in daylight. It was meant to be seen in shadows, so it flickers. And here, Carla Black has just naturally done that. She's just brought gold leaf into the space. And so that half-said thing is something that really interests me, because I think it is very true of a Celtic way of looking at the world.
That's very nice. I mean, I know from working with Carla that it was something that surprised both of us, that how gold leaf actually is happier in the dark. Absolutely. And shines better in the dark. But like our first instinct was to bring light in. I think we bought about 18 new lights to come in here and make it really, really light, and then realized actually the more light you put on it, the less the gold shone. So there is, and like I say, this building wins. You can't fight it. It has the character it has. And is there the other? I suppose if I think about the moments, the new moments in this building, the stair and the ramp, but also the wall, which is out of shot here, but you are looking at the big wall that separates this space from the ramp and the street. Is there something Japanese? Is there something Japanese in the very darkness of that wall? I mean, we can talk about its materials and reuse in a minute, but it seems so logical to me that it's a big black wall. But of course, it's something you've brought in to the building.
Yeah, I mean, there's many layers. There was the little shutters on the warehouse building, so there's a kind of sense of it opening and closing
as people to sell the goods from.
So there's a little bit of that. There's definitely a sense of, and I think it's really courageous on your part that the gaps between the boards are allowed to let light through, because again that means that it's got a character which is not one thing or the other, but you can see to it. Definitely Japan, but also hugely influenced by artists that I love, which people like Roger Ackland, you know, and the idea of making something indelible, like a tattoo. You make something really that you can't erase. I think that's really important, and it comes back to the idea of some elements being figurative. It's almost as if they take on a persona, you know. And I know that we talked about originally, we wanted this David Obey sweating here. We wanted to make it out of tar.
We have samples which are still wet with tar.
But of course, from a fire perspective, that wasn't a good idea. But we were trying to get to that sense of a material that had that kind of elemental feel to it. You know, something really of the earth. And again, as you know, Carlas brought earth in, which again is really amazing.
And so, can you remember as you look back to elements of design like this big wall, which has in the top section at these shutters, which are very unusual in an there's something like a minstrel's gallery, or very unusual in an art gallery, shutters which open and close and bring the light from the street in or not. Can you remember the moment when you thought, oh, I know, we'll do that?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, being my age, I'm getting on a bit. You have all these memories and references that build up and accrue and over the years. And there's a London architect called Florian Beagle, and he did this amazing theatre, and it was called the Half Moon Theatre. And it had the sense of literally another layer. And one of the things that we did, of course, as we all know, is we took the floor out of the warehouse. But by taking the floor out, we lost a lot of stability, so we had to do a lot of work to stabilize it again. But in a sense, the shutters allude to it having another level. And it gives you the possibility of closing it and making the space more hermetic.
They do. Sorry, I've only just got that. They do that, don't they? Because they only inhabit the first floor. They're the only things that inhabit the first floor, because we can't get up there anymore. When we first stood in this building, we stood in that corner up there on the first floor and understood what it was made of. And now the shutters do that.
Yeah. And also, the thing about the old town is that it works vertically. The new town is more horizontal, so George Street or Queen Street. It's these long horizontals, whereas the old town expresses itself vertically, like the city chambers going up Coburn Street. Incredible. And I'm sitting here looking through the shutter and through the window into the old town. So you get that sense of layering.
And the Fruitmarket's original building is stacked too, in a way that I didn't understand until we were working with the artist Philip Barlow, whose exhibition involved making a very heavy structure on the top floor and structures on the ground floor, which looked like they had fallen through the floor from the top floor, because she understood the way that the two floors of the Fruitmarket's original exhibition gallery stack on top of each other. So I guess what you've done here is mirrored that.
A similar thing again. Yeah, and then these views out from the original galleries, from Richard's gallery, out into the old town.
Whereas what most people think about the Fruitmarket is how long we are, and we're doubly long now. We're really long. It's nice to think that we're stacked as well. And was there I mean, you alluded to funding earlier, and obviously nobody ever has the money they would like to have to make an exhibition project, and this has been, you know, it at once had more money and then it had less money, and we tried to make it as actually economical and as theoretically economical as possible. I think I remember saying to you at the beginning, I think we're going to do the principle of when you renovate your bathroom, if you leave the sink in the same place, you can afford better taps. So there has been a kind of sustainability of purpose about this building.
Yeah.
Let's try and leave things in the same place where we can. But you've also brought an element of sustainability of materials in, haven't you? There's very little new stuff in this.
Yeah, I mean, that's very, architects are really concerned about this at this moment. We all are.
Yeah, we all need to be.
With global warming. So the fruit market staying here, apart from the fact this location is where it should be, is also about sustainability, about reusing buildings in a really purposeful way, using materials if we can. And obviously there are elements that we can't. We have to buy new plant, areas of plant. And just replacing things with a more efficient lighting, more efficient heating system.
Yeah.
So that's something we have to do. And I think the accessibility is connected to that as well. Because if the building is used more by more people, then that's more sustainable. So I think it all kind of joins up, I think. But I think in a way, and again, it's maybe the half said thing. I think Scotland enjoys low budgets somehow. Or I don't think it.
We're very good at making do and getting
Yeah,
by.
I think
aren't we?
so. I mean, it is remarkable the differences and variations in budget across the country.
Yeah. So not having a lot of money to splash around in a building, you can make a virtue out of that. But you can also bring that sense of the idea to that. So we're going to reuse materials. We're going to let the guts of this building speak for itself.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't we make a new element that we had to make to shield some of the windows from the station, from the railway? Why wouldn't we use the material that it was literally lying around when I did a very early site visit, when the strip out was happening? There's all this timber lying around and it's still in this building, been repurposed. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think, you know, a project like this is, the cost is more than just the building. You know, there's a lot of other elements to funding which, as you know very well, affect the whole organization. So you're not just raising funds for the physical, you're raising it for other things. I mean, the education part of the building has changed quite remarkably, I think, in terms of space, but presumably it's changed from your perspective and what you can do, and therefore what you have to.
I mean, as you know, a huge part of this, it's never had an education space, a dedicated space for education, which again, we've made a virtue of, and we do a lot of our workshops, a lot of our work with people, engagement work with people in the exhibitions, which is great and is important, but also it's nice to have a space where you can make amends. And it's nice to have a space which a group can own, and perhaps it's a vulnerable group that doesn't necessarily want to work in public. So it's very nice for us to have this education space, and I think you understood that right from the beginning, and the values in our education studio are the same as the values in it's Apollonian space. It's beautiful space, it's logical.
But I mean, there are very practical reasons behind it as well, that you have to extend your funding remit.
Yes.
And every organisation in Scotland is thinking, how do we do that? So I think it's really critical space. And in a way, what's nice about it is it's not nice, not a great word, but it's in an important position as well. It's next to a big gallery space. So it's not as if it's secreted away in this building, which it could have been.
It was for a point, until we realised that putting it right in the middle, right in the middle is what needed it. You know, you can, again, there's ideas and there's language and there's actuality. Why wouldn't engagement be right at the heart of what we do? It is right at the heart of what we do. So why not put it right in the middle? And I think your practice is very, I mean, we talked about access earlier. I think we may have got lost. I think that may have, when we dropped out, we were talking about access, but one of the things that was one of the principles of the building was, you know, when you curate an exhibition or you work in a public building, you think a lot about the order in which people see things. And part of my job is thinking people see that, and then they see that, and then they understand that better because they've just seen that, and you maybe understand, you maybe bring something of what you were thinking when you looked at that to that, and that sense that everyone should have that experience, that everybody should see things in the same order. How hard was that when you're dealing on with a building that exists, its ground floor is on, I think, 4 different levels, none of which are the same as the street apart from at either end? How much of a problem was that sense that we wanted everybody to be able to experience it all in the same order?
It was a challenge. You know, I think geometrically, and David would vouch for that, because ramps and stairs come with their own rules. They have their own language, which I think is wonderful in a way. And so we have to work with their language as well. So sometimes we're saying that we can't do that because of this, and it sounds like an excuse, but in actual fact, it's really critical that a ramp is capable of being walked up, or someone in a wheelchair can manually do that. So that's really, so these are the kind of measurable things that work with the ideas. And I think that in many ways, I'm trying to remember who it was, Bernard Sheeny or something, was a bit rude. It said the more the knots, the greater the pleasure. I don't know what he was referring to, but anyway. And in a sense, you know, the more issues there are, you have to respond to them, and therefore it gives you a direction.
I mean, it's most simple, I think, the realization that in order to get from the Fruitmarket building to the street at the end of this building, the ramp has to be so long that it extends out beyond the end of the warehouse space itself into the space where we put the toilets. Right. And I remember in drawings looking at that and thinking, that's a real shame. Yeah. But then realizing what it did was it meant that you could see that you were going to negotiate the space with the ramp, everybody. It's not like some of you go up the stairs and some of you go up the ramp. We all go up the ramp. And that makes itself very transparent from the minute you see the building from outside. I know you get moments where the entrance into this space coincides with an arched window. By chance, I think. In a sense. I think so. I think it was in the far off days when it was a nightclub and you didn't have to worry about level access. I think it was an entrance, wasn't it? But now it looks like an entrance, but is a window. So now you get that connection, which is really very nice. Yeah, but there was a lot of work that David did to actually reconcile all these quite minor changes in level, but quite significant in design terms. I know it doesn't sound very much. I think it's 80 centimeters, isn't it, from one building to another, but that's actually quite a big step. But in a way, I think that really helps the ramp and the pavement feel as if they're related, you know, they're cousins or something, and that they're negotiating topography. Whereas if it been much more about a building than outside, I don't think that would be as powerful, perhaps. So like that, yeah. Before I see if there are any questions from our audience, I want to ask you a little bit about what it is like making a building where what you're doing is not necessarily the main event. It's an art gallery. It's a backdrop. It's a building for art. How does that feel? I mean, there are no pictures of this space without art in it. The space for me doesn't exist until an artist has played with it and has interacted with it. How does that feel when you? Is that annoying? No, but I don't think it's unique to art galleries. Oh, okay. A school, a primary school, is a kind of empty place without the kids, or a concert hall without music is just a vessel. And I think that's going back to that Japanese thing. You know, beautiful pot makes sense when it's got something in it. And I think it's maybe wrong to enjoy the pot without the liquid in it. You know, I've got 1 or 2 Japanese pots, which I don't use for drinking tea. I look at them. But actually, they would be much more vital if I actually drank tea out of them. And I think architecture, I'll be controversial here, isn't an art. Architecture is architecture, it's a discipline. And it's about being useful. So without the use, I'm not sure it's architecture. I think it's trying to be something else. There's a lot written on that, and I would get into very deep water with colleagues. But whereas art is autonomous, it doesn't necessarily need. Yeah, it needs people in the same way. Yes. You know, what we bring is you know, we help artists find audiences. We help art come into contact with people. And I guess what you're doing that is that as well. We're both providing a context actually for art to expand into and enjoy. That's a lovely way of thinking about it. That of course a building isn't a building until it has a purpose.
Unless it's, I don't know, a mausoleum or something like that.
Well, I don't know. It still needs.
But still,
I think I'm going to raise my eyebrows at Ruth now and see if there are questions from the audience to Neil or about the building or about anything at all. Ruth will speak questions to us.
We've got some lovely questions coming in. The first here is from Kate and Gregory, who said, what was the state of the building, the extension, when the Fruitmarket took it over? I think you've alluded to that a bit.
Do you remember what the state of the building was when you first walked in?
I do. It was horrible. It was really, really horrible. And the sad thing was, it was an old nightclub, which had been many things before that. And it had accrued everything a nightclub does. Multiple carpet layers, all stuck together, linoleum, strange karaoke booths, just an incredible amalgam of ideas, all of which must have looked fantastic in the dark.
In the dark with a drink in your hand, yeah.
Yeah, but suddenly released into the daylight and looking at them really horrific, I think. And I suppose that was where the big leap into the dark was what was it like when you stripped all of that out? And when we did strip it out, that was when the revelation happened, said, actually, this is really good.
There was one tiny moment, wasn't there? Which is still my favourite bit about the entire bit, is where upstairs, you can only see it upstairs, up a very, very small staircase, which was not safe and certainly not accessible to the public when it was a nightclub, or to the clientele when it was a nightclub, where you could see how the steel and the brick worked together upstairs on the walls, and you thought, there is something here. But it was also, I mean, it was a nightclub and it was chaos in that way, that it had all the accretions of the nightclub. The minute you started stripping out the nightclub, you realised how vulnerable the building was to the elements and to Edinburgh. I mean, we spent inordinate amounts of money getting rid of pigeon droppings, did we not? I mean, the building was really in quite a state.
Unsanitary.
Exactly.
Dangerous.
Dangerous in many ways. So yes, not a good state. Are there other questions?
Sorry, I'm typing the question into the chat because it wasn't mentioned.
Oh, okay, sorry, I could repeat the question as well. Yes.
So the next question is, how the heritage of the building influence your approach to the design? So it's working with
Okay, so the question is, I'm going to bowl it straight at you, Neil. How did the heritage of the building influence the design? Or the heritages, maybe?
The heritages, yeah. There's a trendy architecture word, palimpsest, you know, that this marks. And I think the historic, the keepers of the historic fabric, I'll call them that, are interested in those layers. So it's a bit like archaeology. So you're stripping back and you're coming to layers that are credible or meaningful. The nightclub wasn't credible. So in a way, what we were doing was we were working hand in glove with the historic keepers and making it visible, because this space is incredibly interesting in the sense that from the outside, it looks as though it's one thought. But when you come in, you will see that the frame has had many lives, and there's actually been a series of buildings. David knows the history of each individual piece more intimately than I do. But you can see that, and so in a way, that really is what historic. What would you call them? People who are interested in what the history of the building. We've kind of laid it there.
Yes.
Which I think is really interesting.
This space, the warehouse space, the older building, is the raw material of the other building, and you can see that, and you can even see how it hovers over the station. You've left the big truss that both buildings sit on visible in this building, so you can, enormous, great. So you can see it. I mean, one of the best views of the Fruitmarket is from the railway platform underneath, and you can see how it hovers over the station. But you've made that actually very visible inside by leaving those big steel elements visible to everyone. So yeah, I would say the heritage asserts itself.
And that again would be another layer on the materiality, that the materials are meant to chime with that stripping back.
And they're obviously not 100% meant to be seen. One of the things I love about what you've done with the warehouse, the way we've stripped the beams and left them raw, is that you can see that they're written on, you can see where they come from, and sometimes the writing is upside down, because obviously they're never meant to be, you're meant to cover them over, and whoever put them up just didn't care.
Well, it was a warehouse. It didn't matter.
No.
As long as it fulfilled its function. But in saying that, there's an elegance about it, which is really interesting.
Well, it was what you were saying earlier about the truth of the building. There's an elegance because it's doing what it's meant to do. The beams are here because they're holding it up.
Yeah.
It's very simple. They're doing what they're meant to do. There's nothing here that is here purely for decoration, which is, I think, a great part of it. Other questions?
Yes, they keep coming now. Could Neil talk a little bit about those wooden panels behind him?
Oh, Neil, could you talk about the wooden panels behind you?
There are windows beyond those. How can I say this without being rude? We're in a very, very difficult site.
We're about that far away from the main line, the main London line,
electrified
railway
main
line.
line.
Yes.
So
if we weren't already here, we wouldn't be allowed to be built. Would we?
No,
we're too close.
we're too close. So the health and safety aspects of a window giving onto a high voltage railway line, we have to be very, very careful about that. So the idea really was not to brick them up, but just to put a shutter on them. But it's expressed as a different kind of shutter than the shutter on the main screen, which you can't see, but hopefully you can see it, which are operating shutters. This is, I don't know if I've said this before, but these are frames. So they're framed pieces. So they're like paintings. So there is a sense that they could move because they're proud of the wall as opposed to being inset. And in doing that, the sense of the wall is as if the wall continues because it's applied. So it takes on a thinness. So rather than looking at, no, we were perforating the wall, it was as if we had to put something on the wall. Because we felt that brick wall was really good.
Because where you can, you've introduced, when you've bricked up certain openings, of one behind you there, where you've been able to use the brick, it's new brick, and it sits very happily with the old brick. But they're mostly windows. There's also a bit of breeze block. They're windows that have been blocked up and tampered with, and they're harder to engage
there was
with.
just a practical thing about how do you actually build that in without having access to the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
So
the building is a history of what you've done to the building is a history of what you've not been able to do, really, isn't it? I can't imagine that you're very often working on a building that you can't get around the back of.
No.
The fruit market, as well as having no underneath, has no back door. We're the only building, I know Jamie keeps mentioning this to me when we worry about where we put the bins. We have no back door. There's no back. We're all street frontage. There's no back end to the fruit market. We do everything on the street, which is interesting in itself.
This is sort of two questions at once, but are you publishing photos of the whole process from every angle, from original state to finished state? And then the second bit of it is, how is the building held up?
So the first question is, are we publishing photos of the building from beginning to end? We certainly have photographs of every stage of the process. And we're very fortunate to work with some very good photographers. Chris Scott in particular has been here with us right from nightclub through pigeon shit removal right through to it now. And I would love to think, I mean, we've published some of them in this small leaflet. It has in it some of the photographs of the original state as well as what we've done now. And I would certainly imagine that we will publish that. But the second part of the question is, how's the building held up? Can you take that?
Steel.
Steel.
It's a steel frame. Yeah, existing steel frame.
Yeah.
So we didn't really, well, when I say we, the structural engineer had a lot of work to consolidate and stabilize the frame. but the existing frame is this.
It's what you see, yeah.
But when you take a floor out, the floor acts as a major structural element. When that's taken away, the frame is more agile, or it's more mobile and has to be stiffened. So that's really the kind of work that was being done. It was kind of shoring and supporting rather than new structure being put in. And this structure that you probably see in the background goes right down to the station.
Yeah, so as I say, if you stand on the I can't remember, number 13, maybe 8, if you're one of the platforms, if you go down to Waverley through the Market Street entrance there and go down to platform 8, you can walk all along the Fruit Market basically underneath and see exactly how we're held up. But one of the, I vividly remember standing on the first floor of this building saying, I think can we just knock the floor out? If we just knock the floor out, we're going to have a double height building. And you're saying, I think I have to leave some of the steel in it.
Yes.
And I felt that might have been a shame, but now, of course, the steel is what gives this building so much of its character.
Yeah.
It would be a shame if we didn't have that sense of the lost first floor, I think.
Some of it's very delicate. Some very delicate columns. Yeah.
Yes, I've got, goodness only knows how it held up on the very delicate columns in the end. The older columns are much thinner. You can see the age of the building by the design of the columns. When you get really nerdy, you can see exactly what was built there.
I'm sure an engineer would be able to see when different codes came in.
Yes, yeah.
We have a question that's been asked in different forms twice. So,
Okay.
What would you do if budget hadn't been an issue?
Oh,
Kind of
okay.
question.
Neil, do you have anything that you would like to have done that we had to say, no, we haven't got any money? Probably.
No.
No?
I think we may have done it in a different way. I mean, contractually.
Yes.
But I think in a way, any project is a product of its budget. So the budget that we had also what am I trying to say? Directs the project, directs the design, so that maybe if you'd had more money, maybe the timber wall wouldn't have emerged.
Yes. Yeah.
And that would have been disappointing, I think. So I don't think it's really about if you had more money, what would you do? We did what we did because of the budget.
I mean, I do remember I think you're extraordinary in that way for an architect. You do, when beginning to have a conversation about what this might be, you say, well, what have we got? What are we looking at? You don't design a wall and then get it costed. You look at the cost and then think, right, we can do this.
But I think it's because people, I think, wrongly put value on money.
Yeah.
And on, therefore, more money equals a better product. It just means a different product. And it doesn't mean that the one that you had less money to spend on is any worse. It's just different. So the rawness of the timber comes from its budget, but it also comes from our idea.
I mean, certainly the brief was defined by not having enough money. Knowing that we had this building and knowing that we didn't have enough money to prop it up from the outside over the station and connect it to the Fruit Market with a big atrium and a new entrance, knowing we didn't have enough money to do that. The costings of the design we now have were based on what if we do the absolute minimum to this building. And obviously you can never do the absolute minimum. We spent an awful lot of time and money making it look like we haven't done very much.
Well, making it safe.
Yes.
Escapes and all these.
Yeah, oh yes. Toilets, lots of
toilets. Yeah.
Building regulations, extraordinary. The minute you do anything to a building, escapes and toilets and regulations, extraordinary what you need to do. It is a complete learning
but I often
curve.
think that the building regulations are the result of a problem or a disaster somewhere.
Yes.
Sadly.
Yes. Yeah, so they need to be respected.
So you need to respect them. They are there for a reason. To stop people falling off something.
That's very true.
Somebody must have fallen off for that regulation to come. So I don't see them as, they're just one of those measurable things you have to work around. And do you have enough imagination to think that you could turn that into something interesting? Maybe.
I suppose it's worth saying, maybe not, it's not a budget question, but we perhaps wouldn't have done this building in a global pandemic.
No, we might not have. No.
We might not have done that for reasons of global pandemic being awful and a horrible situation anyway, but it presented challenges. I think there was a point where you hadn't set foot in the building for several months.
A long time.
We did an awful lot of it.
Yeah.
With David with his phone on Zoom showing us things.
With me somewhere else.
we wouldn't necessarily have done that, but I don't think the building has, I mean, the timescale and the budget suffered from the pandemic, but I don't think the feel of the building and the joy in the building.
And it put enormous pressure on the contractor,
Yes,
obviously.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for another couple of questions, maybe.
Yeah, actually, one of them was about pandemic, so I think we've answered that.
Yes, time and money. Pandemic added time and money.
But there's another question here about staff, and it says, for Fiona and staff who've known the building for many years, do you feel that you relate differently now to the new gallery spaces? And what has been your favourite reaction to the new spaces by visiting audiences?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I think we
It's
probably...
in the chat already, so I think people can see it, so don't feel...
Okay, it's a lovely question around how the staff relate, how we relate to this new building. And I think all of us would probably have a different answer to our favourite bits and how we relate to it. I think we don't know yet, is my answer. We're beginning, obviously we're still not working from it 100%, that we're still working from home quite a lot, although because it's a public building, we are occupying it. And I'm aware that I'm learning to walk around it, and I'm really enjoying, as I say, walking along the ramp and noticing how you fall into step with people. I'm really enjoying the length of it. In terms of the bits that I like the best, it's the materials. I find myself sort of trapped in a corner like a leaf, sort of looking at the brick and the steel and enjoying how the art interacts with it. But mostly, God, it's the joy of having a new, clean building that's been thought about that can welcome art into it. It's a revelation. The Fruitmarket staff have been 2 years without art. You know, we closed in September, the September before the pandemic, September 2019, and we moved into Waverley Mall. So we absented ourselves from this building, and we've been out of it a year longer than we thought we were going to be. And I think it's when you're used to working in a public building, you miss the public and you miss the art, and it's extraordinary to me that we actually do enjoy both those things. So it's nice to have this building so much a public building. I think what you've built is so much a public building and a building for art. There's joy in that. Is there one more question before we wrap up?
Yes, from Susanna Beaumont. Did Carla get a site on the architect's plans? Her work is usually pastel coloured.
Yeah, although we've been talking quite a lot, haven't we, Neil, about what Carla's brought to the building. I mean, the short answer is no, Carla didn't really. I hesitate to say Carla wasn't interested, but Carla has a very material understanding of space and was not wanting to pore over your plans and was not wanting to find out about the measurements. She knew the space would be dark. She knew it would be brick and steel. She knew she wanted. So she responded so brilliantly to your ideas of the new and the old and the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and the fact that this space is the raw material for that space. And what Carla thought she would do is bring into this space raw material experimented with, material worked on right now, and in the existing space, the older exhibition galleries, work that had been made previously, so the pastel colours and the materials of her practice to date, whereas this space, a kind of a sense of what would happen if she brought materials in and started experimenting with them here. She knew she wanted to use gold leaf. She came into the space on the 10th of May this year and started installing this work on the 14th of May. And all she did was ask for some soil. She knew she wanted to work with gold leaf, but the soil came in from the building. So, so that sense of earthiness and foundation. I mean, she's also, Carla being Carla, she's worked with foundation, the sort of skin foundation. The soil is stuck down with foundation, which obviously I love because we don't have any foundations. So that's very nice to have that slight linguistic play going on as well. But I suppose it's probably worth, yes, sort of ending. Thank you for that question, which is lovely, reminding us that it is a building for art, and really answers my question, or the way I really wanted to end this talk is asking you sort of what next for the building, Neil. You know, Cedric Price, famously, architect Cedric Price, said that architects should always be ready to change their minds, and that architecture has a sell-by date, and that buildings change. How do you imagine this building into the future? Can you do that, or is it ready now?
I can only speak for myself. You know, it's a very difficult thing. I think when you've been working on a project, and particularly project architects, it's been their daily life for
Yes.
years.
Mm.
And then suddenly, over a weekend or something, it's not theirs anymore.
Yes.
But in a way, that's the really good bit, isn't it? When you just give it over. If you're doing a house, and suddenly somebody, you know, I don't know, puts a cup of tea on your oak floor or something. Good God. And there's a sort of sense that architects have got this kind of control, fanatical control. But I think the reality is that it's about control that enables things to happen. And it's the things that happen that are really exciting. So I really don't want to know what's going to happen, in a sense, because you want to come in the festival or something and something is happening and you have no idea, because somebody with a different brain, different imaginations come in and said, "This, I'm going to do this in this space," and we went, "Ah, I thought of that." I think that's what's really exciting. And it's not our building; it's your building, and it will only be your building for as long as you're here. And then it'll be somebody else's building.
Exactly, and it's not my building either. It's not our building.
No.
It's artist's building. It's
Yeah.
audience's building. It's a public building.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
belongs to all of us. Actually,
And that's why I think, again, going back to its location, you know, that location in the between the old and the new, between a new town where people are desperately worried that they change something, and an old town that's based on the fact that it's accrued, it's built up. There's mistakes, there's ugly bits. I think that's what's about, isn't it? It's about
so
accrued.
yeah, all we've actually done is add another layer
Yeah.
to the town
Yeah, yeah.
and to the building and to people's lives, which is very nice, I think. I think we should end it there. We're in danger of slightly running out of time. I do want to end, before I thank Neil for so much, just by saying, please come and see it. Come and visit us. We're open, we're here. You don't even need to book in anymore. Please come and see the space. We also, you can see us via the Bloomberg Connect app. So you can see us digitally. A lot of what we do is on there. Do pick up this leaflet, which explains a little bit about how the building came into being. I think it is available also digitally through our website. There are other events we'll be doing online and live as well. So come and join in, come and change the building with us. It's here for you, really, and is nothing until it's inhabited and changed and engaged with. But just to end, a huge thank you to David Anderson, who is not here, and to Neil Gillespie, who is, I think you've wrought miracles. You've made a beautiful, beautiful thing, which we're privileged to play with, really, and invite artists to play with. So thank you for talking
No, you're very
with me
kind.
about it.
I suppose I can now say it's been a pleasure, but it might not have been a few weeks ago. But
Yeah,
no, I think it's been a remarkable experience, I think, for all of us, and it's been a great team from your side, and a great team from ours, I think.
Well, we've had fun, which is goodness knows that's, if you can't do that, then what's the point? Really?
Yeah, and a building like this doesn't come along very often. So it's a rare opportunity. So thank you.
That's a lovely note to end on. So we'll say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining us. Sorry about the technical hitches, but we'll get better at this as we keep doing it. Thank you and good night.